When I was little, and I mean like really little, I had an obsession with the Beatles. I had Beatles books, toys, playing cards, even like a Halloween costume. I watched the Yellow Submarine movie religiously. I knew everything about them. I knew that Paul McCartney was left-handed and that Ringo was trained to drum left-handed on a right-handed kit. I knew that John Lennon drew inspiration from Hindu teachings. I knew that George Harrison was friends with Monty Python. Just a whole bunch of worthless trivia that only fed my fixation more. There was, however, one fact that I did not know. It was a dark and potentially stormy night, and I was driving home from a nice family restaurant with two of my aunts sitting next to me. I was babbling on about the Beatles, and something must have slipped out along the lines of, I hope I'll get to meet John someday, when my world was shattered. So, here's a fun fact about the Beatles that nobody had bothered to tell me until then. John Lennon was actually murdered in December of 1980, which, as you can imagine, not a pleasant revelation for me. Sure, all children have to learn about death at one time or another, but you'd think they'd have the common sense not to teach me, an emotionally volatile toddler, within a confined space with no escape. So maybe half an hour later, when I had finished crying, I started asking about the other Beatles. Ringo? Paul? Oh, they're fine, sweetie, don't worry. George? I've been told that I wouldn't stop crying for days. I brought my Beatles books into school, hugging them, sobbing, confusing my teachers to no end. I was inconsolable. Could you blame me? If you're going to teach your kid about death, maybe don't do it twice in one evening. Of course, this is all obvious, but only in hindsight. I love both of my aunts, and both of them have apologized profusely over the last 15 years for this incident. However, one thing does still leave me wondering. It only takes one person to say that John Lennon is dead. Maybe two, if somebody else decided to throw in the boot about George Harrison. And yet, they both take the blame. Was there collusion? Is one covering for the other? Do they both feel guilt, one for exposing the truth and one for not stopping her? Let's look at a popular thought experiment offered by Erwin Schrödinger called Schrödinger's cat. This experiment is not to be used as a model, but a critique of a common interpretation of quantum mechanics called the Copenhagen principle. The experiment goes as follows. A cat is placed in a box which contains a flask of poison, a radioactive source, and a Geiger counter. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to replace the radioactive source and Geiger counter here with a coin with a 50-50 chance of heads or tails, because that might be easier to understand. Now, if the coin is flipped and results in tails, the flask would be broken and the cat would die of the poison. However, if it's heads, the flask would remain intact and the cat would be fine. In the end, there's an equal chance that the cat is either alive or dead. However, until we observe it, we can't say for certain which it is. The idea behind the Copenhagen principle is that it is neither alive nor dead, and it's both alive and dead all at the same time. However, in practicality, that's absurd. Superposition be damned, the cat is either alive or dead. In the real world, we can't have both. But is this the real world? I was a toddler. I still believed that the moon was made out of cheese, and that Harry Potter was real, and that the United States was an egalitarian society with no place for oligarchy or foolish notions like trickle-down economics. Sure, the Copenhagen principle might not be applicable to the real world, and is largely dismissed by now in favor of things like the objective collapse theories and the ensemble interpretation, but I don't need life coming at me that fast. Maybe a little bit of cognitive dissonance would be good. Maybe my aunts can exist in a quantum superposition of guilty and not guilty for inflicting reality upon a toddler. At the end of the day, I'm happy with that. I don't want the blame to be put on anyone, really. My aunts are some of the coolest people I know. Seriously, one of them was a pinniped trainer, and the other one took care of wildlife in Africa. Like, how friggin' neat is that? I don't want to hold anything against them, and even if I did have something to hold against them, I wouldn't deign to do such a thing. Sometimes, unanswered questions are best left unanswered.